Thanks. I don't know much about maybe woodlot management, so I changed the title slightly to maybe appreciating the biodiversity in your woodlot. So hi everyone, thanks for having me. I grew up, just a bit about me. I grew up in a large city in Ontario until I was 18, at which point I moved to Nova Scotia for university and never really looked back. I've had several great mentors that exposed me to many different facets of conservation biology along the way. But I think the thing that's always remained with me is that formal education can't really give you the knowledge that the intrinsic data gathering that happens when you live and work in a familiar landscape over many years, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate. So these are a couple of the things I'll talk about, and my slide is mostly pictures of me. Most of the photos I've taken during my job, and here you can see me paying really close attention to Ryan, probably telling us some really important things. And I do like a selfie, so be prepared. So all that to say, I'm not an expert, and I get to learn every day, and I get to learn with a lot of people as well. So I learn from my colleagues, I get to learn from the various experts I work with. There's MTRI, there's researchers with the community and other NGOs and experts as well. So yeah, and if you didn't make the slideshow, there's always next year. So, in my position, I'm fortunate that I get to visit many different kinds of forests, bogs, and wild places. And it's given me a kind of internal beacon that I'm still working on. That lets me know when I'm in somewhere that has a lot of biodiversity, maybe something I haven't seen before, and when I'm in a forest that might need a little bit more management to get it, to create better wildlife habitat. So, what is better wildlife habitat and what is biodiversity? As with most things, it depends on your end goals. Provincially, we tend to manage things for species at risk, so the focus can become very narrow, with no disturbance buffers being the most likely management option. For the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus on the diversity part of biodiversity, with the knowledge that first recognizing, then honoring, and ultimately creating or enhancing diversity in our woodlands can achieve many goals across landscape management. So, when thinking about diversity in a forested environment, one concept that comes to mind is the transition zone between different types of habitat, which we often call edges. Edges are created whenever a road is built, whenever a buffer is put in around a water feature, and whenever openings are created in the overstory. As new ground gets exposed to light, there becomes an opportunity for new vegetation to take hold. Here you can see Stephen in an opening there with some good growth coming up. So predictably, there will be early colonizing plants like wildflowers, different plants that grow berries, and young tree shoots, all of which provide important nutrition and variety for many species of birds, insects, and mammals. And at this time of year, it's in the spring, we can see that many birds have nested in these edge habitats where they may have been closer to their food source or able to travel with less fear of predation. And then later in the season, in the summer, pollinators such as bees and butterflies will be buzzing around the wildflowers, ensuring that they give way to berries and nuts that are relied on by many other organisms. So, in addition to edges, what are areas that aren't ideal for forestry can often contain very rich and diverse biodiversity? And one of the questions there that we had for Cindy's talk was, do we visit every Crown land site that is up for review? And the answer is we try to. And I would say that when I'm doing a desktop review, so that means looking at the file as it comes in, if there's a wet area, I tend to try my best to visit that spot, because that's where we find a lot of features that are really important. So when I enter a site and it is wet, one of the things that I look at are lichens, and I am not a lichen expert. I've done a little bit of work with Brad Toms from MTRI, by which I mean I followed him around and asked many questions. And so I've become a little bit better at knowing when I'm in an area that has important lichen growth. So that's something that I would then flag or send along to someone else. Like, I'm not going to be the person who is the be-all end-all on that knowledge. Here's some photos of lichens. That top one's a blue felt lichen. There's a lung lichen, and then the bottom corner there. There's 2 lichen species there that are good indicators of really good lichen habitat, more old growth kind of lichens. Yeah. So another thing that I want to mention is when I'm at a site, couple of things we use are apps. They've been really great and helpful. I heard someone mention iNaturalist before. There's this app you can get that's also called Seek. So Seek is connected to your iNaturalist account, but you don't have to upload your observations. So you could, it's basically it just uses your camera, and you can scan it over, ferns or flowers or plants or people, and it will identify to the best of its abilities the organism. And I found it really helpful. It's not super great for lichens, but it at least can sometimes get you down to maybe what family you're supposed to be looking in. And then the other one we use is called Merlin. So that's been really great during certain times of year when the birds are here. There is a feature when you open the Merlin Bird app and you can ID with sound. So you can just stand there with your phone and it tells you, it makes a recording and it can tell you the birds that it can identify. And again, it does need verification, but at least you have that sound recording there with you, with the timestamp. So, another thing I was going to mention was we also have access to a lot of data that maybe isn't available public, it's not out there on the internet. But if you ever have a question about your own land and you want to know if there's anything in particular that we might have files on, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, and that's like one of our favorite things to do, is to try and see if we might have any information that we can give you about your woodlot. There's also the Nova Scotia Provincial Landscape Viewer, which is a great resource as well. So another thing about these wet areas is often, it does depend on where you are in the province, but if I'm seeing a lot of white ash, I'll keep an eye out for black ash. White ash can be a good indicator of habitat for black ash. And I just have some of the, it's not that straightforward to identify. Black ash is notoriously different. So, even I find I'm often going to other experts with my photos or with the leaf cluster to see if I've made the right identification. But finding new spots of black ash is really exciting. It's really cool. So now I'm going to talk about vernal pools. Vernal pools are seasonal, so in most cases, they don't hold water all year round, but the official definition here from Nova Scotia Environments defines it as it must dry out completely every few years. They occur next to forests and wooded areas. There's no permanent streams flowing in and out. They're usually small and shallow. And they must be large enough and hold water for long enough that amphibians can be successful in laying their eggs without fear of predation or the pool drying out. And the first wet and warm spring night will bring out these amphibians as they leave their usual habitat in search of adequate pools for breeding. You can also hear wood frogs and spring peepers once they begin their mating calls. So if you're lucky enough to stumble on a vernal pool, have a look for egg masses. And if you're really lucky, you might see fairy shrimp, whose eggs survive in the ground, dry, and then when the vernal pool comes, they sort of wake up. So they're really neat. They're not that common, and they're really neat to see if you find them. And then finally, we want to ensure that biodiversity features inherent to established forests are maintained and minimally impacted during forestry activities. And these are just some fun things that you can't really see on the photo, but one of the tall tree, it had a bunch of woodpecker holes in it. At the bottom, there's a really neat example of a tree that's been allowed to decompose, providing lots of habitat for insects. And then that one just in the corner, that was a really great example of a scrape and rub I found. So standing deadwood and older trees with cavities create excellent nesting opportunities for birds, bats, squirrels, and insects. I really like that one. The polypore is sort of it's like a porch overhang for the animal that's living in that little hole. And that's my dog checking out another really large cavity. If you see a big rock outcrop, maybe think about how this could be a den for bear, coyotes, or foxes. I don't often like seeing these in the middle of winter. I move past those quickly, but it's always neat to explore them. Take a look and notice the mushrooms, berries, and nuts that provide food for animals, insects, and birds. Notice the game trails that usually lead from sources of food and water to resting places or along travel corridors. And so we have a game trail, then we have a rabbit run, and then that's sort of your classic bobcat going over a log picture. And I do really enjoy being in the woods in the winter because you can see recent wildlife visitors, at least those that walk on the ground. So speaking of spying on your wildlife visitors, this winter we continued the research looking into the marten populations in the West. This entailed putting up trail cameras around a beaver carcass suspended in the trees with marten lure placed around the site. The cameras were retrieved after about a month in the woods, and the photos are being analyzed now. We already have a few spots with positive results. Marten are small carnivores in the mustelid family, which also contains fisher, mink, weasels, ermines, otter, beaver, skunks, and others not in Nova Scotia. For their size, marten have large home ranges. Male home ranges are between 2.5 to 8 kilometers squared, and they don't overlap. This means they require large swaths of relatively intact forest with mature softwood species and vertical complexity, meaning lots of snags and deadwood. And although we tempted them with beaver, their primary prey species would be small mammals such as squirrel and snowshoe hare. So they need habitat that supports these species as well. And if you see a marten and you would like to report it, we would be more than happy to have your observation. We've known there's always been a population of marten in the southwest, and we're just trying to get an idea of how large that range is and how sustainable it is as well. This is just a picture of some of the areas. So we also access the Tobeatic via helicopter. So we put cameras out in Digby as well, but we were deeper into the Tobeatic via helicopter. It was really fun. And you'll see that map at the top that kind of shows you how we had a grid, and within that grid, we wanted to have one camera or one site per location. And then that's just more pictures of our setup. We had extendable ladders that we'd hike in once we found a spot where we could land the helicopter and found appropriate habitat. And yeah, part of the problem too was you needed 3 trees that were a certain distance apart, facing the right way, so that the sun wouldn't be in the camera's viewpoint, and also that you wouldn't have any branches setting off the camera. So yeah, I'll just leave you with when I talk about intrinsic knowledge that can't be read about in a textbook, I think about a time one of my mentors was giving me advice about returning to camp in the dark from a deer stand. I was a little bit nervous, as it would be dark, and I wasn't sure if I knew the way. He told me if I started to second guess myself, to close my eyes and my feet would be able to feel the path, that although overgrown, had been used for many years. This always struck me as very woodsy advice, and I've since used this trick a couple of times, dark or not. I think it shows that human presence on the landscape is always felt, even if you can't see it, but it can be part of a well-managed and thoughtful legacy. Thank you.